All right. This morning in Vienna, the Secretary General spoke by pre-recorded video message to the first meeting of the states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. He said that the once unthinkable prospect of nuclear conflict is now back within the realm of possibility. The Secretary General reiterated the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is an important step towards the common aspirations of a world without nuclear weapons. He told participants that the decisions they make at this meeting will help cement the treaty's position as an essential element of the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. These decisions will also hopefully convince more countries to get on board. His full message is online. Excuse me. This evening, our Deputy Secretary General, Mina Mohammed, will depart New York for Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, to attend the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and will meet with United Nations officials and other stakeholders. On June 26th, she will go to Paris to participate in the Transforming Education Pre-Summit and meet the member states and other stakeholders. On 30th of June, she will then travel on to Lisbon, where she will participate in the UN's Oceans Conference. The Deputy Secretary General will be back in New York on July 4th. Turning to Ukraine, I can tell you that together with our humanitarian partners, we were able to deliver yesterday 12 trucks of critical supplies to help nearly 64,000 people in the cities of Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. Those are close to the front lines in the government-controlled areas of Donetsk Oblasts. Humanitarian needs have increased over recent weeks in those two cities and are particularly concerning in Slovyansk. Slovyansk, which is just 10 kilometers from the front line, has experienced intense shelling over the past weeks. Previously home to about 100,000 people, or about a quarter population, now remains. Those are mainly elderly, who are among the most vulnerable and who are spending their days hiding from the constant bombardment. People in that town, we are told, have no piped water, and electricity is quite limited. Basic supplies are lacking, with the few shops that remain open. And of course, as usual in these situations, the prices have gone up markedly. Yesterday's humanitarian convoy reached Slovyansk with water purification tablets, vital hygiene supplies to cover the needs of 20,000 people, critical household items for around 2,000 people, and enough food to feed around 5,000 people for a month. We also went to Kramatorsk, where kits to purify water and hygiene supplies will be provided for more than 20,000 people, and food assistance for at least 10,000 men, women, boys, and girls. The humanitarian convoy was possible thanks to the support of several UN agencies, as well as non-governmental organizations. The international community has now stepped up and generously provided 70% funding to our humanitarian appeal for Ukraine, which stands at $2.25 billion. Turning to Mali, where we add our voice to the strong condemnation by our colleagues in the peacekeeping mission following attacks by extremist groups on a number of villages in the Bandiagara region of central Mali. This happened over the weekend, and according to the mission, more than 100 civilians were killed and several homes and shops were burnt. These attacks also led to the forced displacements of several hundred civilians. The mission says that attacks also took place in several localities in the Gao region of Mali, causing the deaths of dozens of men, women, or children, as well as the displacement of populations fleeing the insecurity. We extend our condolences to the families of the victims and to the people of Mali, and wish a speedy recovery to the wounded. In accordance with its mandate given to it by the Security Council, the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali facilitated a visit for the region's authorities to the areas impacted by the violence. An integrated team from the mission operating from Mopti took part in this visit. At the request of the Malian Armed Forces, the UN peacekeeping mission also assisted in the evacuation of wounded civilians to Sivare town. The mission is ready to support national authorities, assist the population, and strengthen security, depending on the needs and based on close coordination with the Malian armed forces, including ground patrols and aerial reconnaissance or aerial deterrence. The mission also continues to pursue its actions to support the stabilization of central Mali, which is a strategic priority. And in Kinshasa, starting today through the Friday, the authorities there are hosting a forum to develop draft regional strategy and action plan to prevent and combat hate speech in Central Africa. The meeting gathers communications professionals as well as media regulators, civil society from countries in the Economic Community of Central African States. The forum is jointly organized by the Regional Office for Central Africa of the UN and the Economic Community of Central African States, with support from several UN officers, including the peacekeeping missions in the region and the International Organization for la Francophonie. Today marks 15 years since the start of the blockade of the Gaza Strip. Our humanitarian colleagues say that largely due to the blockade, poverty, higher unemployment rates, and other factors, nearly 80% of Gazans now rely on humanitarian assistance. More than half of Gaza's more than 2 million people live in poverty. Nearly 80% of the youth there are unemployed. This year, humanitarians need $510 million to provide food, water, sanitation, and health services to 1.6 million people. The appeal is just currently 25% funded. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, UNRWA, needs an extra $72 million by the end of September for its Gaza emergency food program to meet the food needs of 1.1 million Palestinian refugees through the end of the year. The World Food Program also needs an extra $35 million to compensate for increasing commodity prices. More needs to be done to alleviate the humanitarian situation, with the eventual goal of full lifting of the Israeli closures in line with Security Council Resolution 1860 of 2009. Only sustainable political solutions will relieve the pressure on the long-suffering people of Gaza. Efforts must also continue to encourage all Palestinian political factions towards political consensus and bringing Gaza and the occupied West Bank under one legitimate democratic Palestinian authority. Turning to Bangladesh, our friends at UNICEF say they're providing emergency relief to children stranded by recent floods. 4 million people, including 1.6 million children, need urgent help. UNICEF has already dispatched 400,000 water purification tablets that can support 80,000 households with clean water for a week. The agency is also working to support the government's response with millions of water purification tablets, more than 10,000 water containers, and thousands of hygiene kits for women and adolescent girls. UNICEF is also procuring emergency medical supplies for district health facilities. And the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, began a 4-day official mission to Bosnia and Herzegovina today. This is the first visit by High Commissioner for Human Rights in Bosnia and Herzegovina since 1998. She will meet with senior government officials, representatives of civil society, survivors, and victims of the conflict that took place in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and members of the judiciary and representatives of the international community. Quick update from the Comoros, where our UN team there, led by the resident coordinator, Francois Batalingaya, just completed a 25-day campaign to support the national vaccination program and boost the number of people, particularly adolescents, vaccinated against COVID-19. Our team, including WHO and UNICEF, provided technical support to more than 70% of adolescents in the country with the COVID-19 vaccines. UNICEF continues to train groups of young people to mobilize their communities on the importance of the vaccines, and the team also is gearing up for a follow-up 3-day vaccination campaign to support national authorities in reaching 100% coverage for adolescents. Yesterday, you will have seen the Secretary General told the Security Council that humanitarian needs in Syria are the highest since the start of the war 11 years ago. The massive humanitarian response that the UN and our partners are conducting in Syria has staved off the worst, but more is required. He added that while increasing cross-line assistance was an important achievement, the present circumstances, it is not the scale needed to replace the massive cross-border response, and he called on Security Council members to maintain consensus on allowing cross-border operations to continue. And we also issued a statement in which the Secretary General commended the people of Colombia for their participation in historic voter turnout in the second round of the presidential elections, which will result in the elections of Gustavo Petro and his running mate, Ms. Francia Marquez, to the leadership. And that was shared with you. Today is the International Day of something I am physically unable to do, and that is the International Day of Yoga. But I do hope to get there at some point. In a message for the day, the Secretary General notes that this year's theme is Yoga for Humanity. It reminds us how yoga is truly universal in a world beset by disaster and division. And he says yoga's values of mindfulness, balance, moderation, discipline are essential as we seek out new relationship with one another and our planet. On this important day, he adds, let us be inspired by the timeless practice and values of yoga. And it's also the International Day of the celebration of the solstice. I'm surprised, James, you're not at Stonehenge partying and running around. Tomorrow, my guest will be Valentine Rukwabiza, who is our recently appointed Special Representative for the Central African Republic and head of the peacekeeping mission. She's briefing the Council, but she will then join us afterwards. James.
First, can I start with the DSG's trip to Chogum? So she'll be in Rwanda.
Yeah,
she'll be in Rwanda, in Kigali, and we've noted the UN's very strong opposition to the refugee resettlement from the UK. One assumes she'll see President Kagame and Prime Minister Johnson. What will be her message for them? And the second part of the question, what will she also be saying to the President about the resurgence of M23 and the very difficult relations between Rwanda and DRC now?
On your first part, I don't know if she'll see Prime Minister Johnson. I mean, if this comes up in any of her meetings, she will restate our positions and the Secretary General's very clear position on this. On the situation of the M23, I think we've been very clear for a need for de-escalation, and not just the M23, but I would say other armed groups operating in the Eastern Congo, for the need for countries to stop using proxies, right? To find ways to bring the region together. We noted, I think, the declaration that was adopted yesterday in the meeting in Nairobi. The Secretary General, for his part, fully supports the decision taken by the leaders of the East African community. He hopes this will help countries in the region come together. And of course, I think what's very important, if the eventuality of a deployment of a regional force, that there be coordination and very active coordination between all militaries operating in Eastern Congo.
The Secretary General had a discussion with the Turkish President Erdogan. We know that from a Turkish readout. We don't know it from a UN readout. We have not had any readout of that discussion. So can you tell us what they discussed, and can you tell us what they discussed specifically? I mean, I'd like to know the wider discussion, but specifically on the grain deal and how close that is now.
The Secretary General and President Erdogan did have a conversation. It was focused on this grain deal, so that you refer to, on how to get grain to market from the war-impacted area. The discussions are continuing actively, but I'm not in a position to give any prediction or time frame.
I'll have one more for now. I've got more, but I'll have one more for now if I can, which is there seems to be considerable tension now between Lithuania and Russia regarding Kaliningrad. As you know, Lithuania is applying EU sanctions on the land route, the train route into Kaliningrad. Russia has now said, the head of the Russian Security Council has said Russia will respond to such hostile actions. What's the Secretary General's reaction?
I mean, we're obviously following these developments very closely in and around Kaliningrad, including, I think, the warnings we have seen of possible escalation, which are very concerning. It's very important for us that all sides deal with their concerns through effective dialogue with appropriate diplomatic channels in accordance with international law, and to refrain, I think, from any statement or from any action that could aggravate the tense situation. Edward and then Linda.
Okay, today I just got one question on Afghanistan. There's the travel ban and the related sanctions on Taliban, and there's the waiver for some certain top officials from Taliban to travel, but that waiver expired on Monday, this Monday, 20th. And I believe the Security Council would discuss this issue maybe next week. So I just want to know for the Secretary General, what's his position on the extension? And what might be the pros and cons for this?
Look, analyzing the pros and cons, I will leave that. I will leave that to you. That's your job. The Security Council has sanctions in place. It is part of the authority of the Security Council. Our concern continues to be with the lack of progress and I guess the continued backwards progress on human rights in Afghanistan, especially when it comes to women and girls. I mean, it's clear for us that no country, let alone Afghanistan, can ever hope to develop its full potential while not allowing half of its population to gain an education. And that's a message we continue to convey to the authorities in Kabul.
But do you think the extension of the waiver of travel ban could help this talk with the Taliban?
Look, I think there are different ways and different parts of the UN system is pushing, hopefully, towards the same goal. Linda Fasulo.
Thank you, staff. Following up on the package deal, I was just wondering, is it about a month, maybe 3 weeks since the Secretary General launched his attempt to get an agreement, and of course early on he visited key players. I was just wondering. I mean, I know about the Erdogan meeting, but I was wondering if perhaps any kind of meetings are in the offing to, again, maybe a second round of meeting with Russians, Kyiv, U.S., et cetera.
We've seen a lot of reports of that. I think meetings will happen when they need to happen, when we think we've got something concrete. At this point, there's an enormous amount of phone diplomacy going on, with hopefully everybody working in the same direction.
I just wanted to follow up regarding Security Council members. I was just wondering what the level of communication or support or action, individual action by Security Council members might be in terms of trying to aid the Secretary General, in this.
Well, I mean, I think, a few weeks ago, the Security Council issued a press statement backing the Secretary General's efforts, which we very much welcome. So we saw that as a voice of unity. And frankly, I think it's the only piece of paper on Ukraine that has received unanimity from the Security Council, and I think that was very important. I think every member state wants to be helpful and is being and we hope it wants to be helpful, and we continue to be in touch with the key players to try to put this puzzle together for the benefit. Let's remind ourselves of hundreds of millions of people, especially in the developing world, who are seeing a huge increase in their food bill and even their access to food. And not only food, but of course fertilizer. And part of the grain which is also an important thing to remember, is not only for humans, but a lot of it is for animal feed, right? So the repercussions are actually multiple.
Thank you.
One.
Any comments on the Russian announcement that Geneva Convention protections do not apply for the Americans fighting for Ukraine?
No, I do not have a comment on that. Okay, Ephraim, and then we'll go back to James, and then I'm feeling Edward, and then, okay, thank you.
I have two questions today, actually. Just to go back a little bit to Ms. Mohammed's visit to Kigali, I know you said if the conversation comes up, she will reiterate the UN position, but we just celebrated World Refugee Days. We have a new report from UNHCR that sets the number of people on the move at 100 million. And Mr. High Commissioner Filippo Grandi, in his press conference last week, particularly singled out this UK deal as particularly bad for his work and for humanitarian agencies' work, as it sets a precedent for other countries who would follow suit with the UK and start exporting the responsibilities. So don't you think this should be on high priority on her visit?
The Secretary General has been very clear in his view on the deal, and I have no doubt that the issue will be raised.
And another question on the figure of 800 Syrian refugees leaving Turkey weekly these days. Just wonder what your Secretary General, the UN, thoughts on President Erdogan's plan to relocate the millions of Syrian refugees in his country to the border and building cinder block houses for them. And what does the UN
I think on Syria,
about?
we've been very clear in calling for all member states to uphold the territorial integrity of Syria. And also, as a matter of principle, our position has always been that refugees should only return when they feel it is safe and in a way that is dignified. James.
Two more. One first, a follow-up to Morad's question. You said you had no comment on it, but two US soldiers or two US citizens are being held by the Russians, who claim they are soldiers of fortune, who say the Geneva Conventions don't apply. And this is why I want to know why...
Sorry, maybe I misheard. I maybe misunderstood Murat's question. I thought it was the comments
they
on
could face execution.
Russia saying they did not want... It had to do with the Syria talks.
No,
Okay.
it's about the two US soldiers being
Right.
held by Russia, who Russia says the Geneva Conventions don't apply. They're soldiers of fortune, according to Russia. And why I think the UN should have a comment is potentially they face execution.
Right. I mean, then I clearly did not understand. Did not understand the question. Combatants should be treated and held according to international law. We stand firmly against the use of the death penalty in any matter, shape, or form, or in any case. As far as the Geneva Conventions, it's the ICRC that is the holder of those conventions, should comment in further detail.
And my other question is about another organisation's journalism, but the BBC has come up with some claims, very worrying claims, of further sexual abuse in the UN system and corruption in the UN system. I'm sure you've seen these whistleblower claims. What is the Secretary General going to do to try and get to the bottom of this?
Well, first of all, I think when it comes to people who feel they have suffered sexual harassment or abuse within the UN system, our heart goes out to them. And they need to be heard, and they need to be seen. Since the beginning, since he took office, the Secretary General has focused on strengthening the whistleblower protection. He did it when he first came into office. He did it a short while later. There is a very robust program. I think since 2017, about 68 people have been given some sort of protective status because they reported wrongdoing. I think we have done a huge amount in trying to address the issue of sexual harassment, for one, through the creation of new units within OIOS, focusing solely on sexual harassment, staffed mostly with female investigators, the creation of a hotline. I think one very important tool, which was put in place just a few years ago, is what we call the clear check system, which basically stops this loophole where people could leave one part of the UN in one part of the world and join another part of the UN. Now, anyone who has been dismissed for sexual abuse, for sexual harassment, or who has left prior to an investigation on those things and decided to leave the organization before an investigation is concluded, is now on sort of a UN no-fly list, right? And we now have about 568 names, 564 names on that list. That's a hugely important tool because we kept hearing people who would be able to leave one and join the other. I think like any organization in the private sector or in the public sector, it is a constant struggle to better our systems, to create the atmosphere where people feel they can come forward without fear, without retaliation, to report not only sexual harassment, but any sort of wrongdoing. And we are constantly looking at our systems and trying to improve them.
But given that background and context, is the Secretary General concerned that clearly there are still cases, the system isn't catching them all,
Well,
and there are fresh reports here? What is his reaction to those reports, and is he going to launch a specific investigation into the
Look, we haven't been able to see the full documentary yet because we can't see it from here. So we'll see. We'll look at the documentary. I think a lot of the people, from what I gather, they've interviewed people who have been these are cases in the past, but which doesn't make them any less bad. But I think we have, and I think especially since Mr. Guterres came into office, taken a very, very strong stance on ensuring accountability. And I would say, we are more transparent than I think we explain, and more transparent people give us credit for. There are, as you know, we produce a lot of reports, and maybe there's an overload of information, but there are reports produced annually or biannually of disciplinary measures. Cases of sexual abuse in peacekeeping missions are updated on a daily basis on a website. So I think there is a huge amount of transparency, but that does not mean that we cannot do better and that we will continue to try to do better. Senora.
Stefan, yesterday it was confirmed that American citizen who is being jailed with terrorism charges in Venezuela tried to kill himself over the weekend. The family is asking Governor Richardson to get involved. Has the UN got any requests from any organization to try to request his...
I'm not aware here. You may want to try with our human rights colleagues at different human rights mechanisms in Geneva.
Is any concerns of political detainees according...
Well, I mean, we've expressed our concern. I mean, I don't know the particulars of this case, but we have expressed our concern at the continuing presence of detainees in Venezuela. Speaking of someone who is not a detainee, Paulina, you're a prisoner of the podium.
I asked for a question.
I'm sorry. It is not a statement, it is an oversight. Please, sir.
It's okay. My question is about Libya. The Libyan side did not agree on constitutional rules. And the news says that the days of Stephanie Williams are numbered. Now, there is a meeting of the Security Council next week on Libya, and there are two on the short list for a special envoy, one African and one European. Security Council, as you know, is divided. Do you expect the meeting next week to, because of the urgency of the situation, to name or to agree on a special envoy to Libya?
I've been in the UN slightly fewer years than you have, Abdelhamid, and I think we both know to tamper expectations for things that may or may not happen. So let's see what happens. I think we can only be disappointed by the fact that the various Libyan factions failed to come to an agreement for the sake of people of their own country, for the sake of the millions who registered to vote, who wanted to be able to express their political opinions freely. My understanding is that there may be another meeting within next 10 days. I think it's never too late to come to some sort of an agreement, and we hope that Libyan leaders will put first and foremost the interest of the Libyan people at the top of their agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina.